Hello, hello, everyone. I'm Evan Gatesman, and you're listening to the Sustainability Podcast from Nevada Conservation League, where we're working to create conservation conversations. And we are the independent political voice of Nevada's conservation community. We work to maintain and enhance the natural character of Nevada and the quality of life for Nevadans through effective advocacy, the election of pro-conservation candidates, and building collaboration. And our topic for discussion today is public service on public lands. And I'm elated to be joined by one of the greatest conservationists of our time, Jim Boone. And I just want to start with a little bit of background. What made you passionate about conservation? Did you start with collegiate experiences when you got your PhD in ecology, or did you begin your interest before that?
Really, I began my interest long before that. Growing up, we were sort of a lower middle income household. We couldn't afford to go on vacations to fancy places, so we'd go camping. And so I grew up camping in the deserts around Southern California and the national parks, and decided early on that I wanted to be a park ranger. And it just sort of built from there.
Wow, that's awesome. What made you want to be a park ranger?
I saw it as an opportunity to live out in wild, beautiful places and do something useful to help Mother Nature, or at least defend Mother Nature.
Great. Yeah, that's kind of one of the ways I got into it too. In college, I had to sit down and decide what I was going to do, and I decided that no matter what I do, I don't want to be stuck in a cubicle behind some computer doing some computer programming, which is what I started off in college. And I wasn't a fan, so I switched basically 180, went straight from the least sustainable thing to the most sustainable thing, basically. So Jim, what are the first steps that people can take to get involved in conservation in their communities?
Well, joining with like-minded people is always a good way to get started. So you can get together with Audubon or Sierra Club or Nevada Conservation League and meet people and see what they're doing and get tuned into what your local issues are, and then find your niche and grab your own reins and go for it.
Awesome. What does it look like to get involved for most people? Is there a main way that most people get in or start their conservation resume, or does it kind of look different for everyone?
Well, it probably looks different for everyone, but the thing to do is to find a group of people in your own town that are involved in these sorts of things. So go on the internet and look up Red Rock Audubon or your own local Audubon, find out when their meetings are, and go to a meeting and just introduce yourself, or sit there quietly and see what they're doing and think about whether or not it sounds like an organization you'd want to do. Audubon does a lot of things other than just go up bird watching, or go to a Sierra Club meeting and hang out there. You'll find quite a spectrum of people there, from the more conservative people to the really real firebrands that want to get out there and do civil disobedience types of things. You find quite a range. It's a good way to get an introduction to sort of what's going on around you.
Great. So, as Nevadans, we occupy one of the states with the most public land. I think we're number 2 after Alaska. What benefits does that grant us as Nevadans?
Well, it grants us a huge recreational opportunity. If you like getting outdoors, there's just nothing like being in Nevada, where virtually anywhere you go, you can walk out on the land. When I was in grad school, I was in Georgia, and it was quite a problem there to find a place. You could drive for hours just following along fence lines with keep out signs on them. It's either a private forest or a private pasture or private farmland, anything like that. So it was really hard. You actually had to go to a state park or something with picnic tables and entrance fees to actually find a wild place in Georgia or in the South. Whereas out here, you just drive out in the desert and you're wild and free as soon as you get out of the city limits.
Wow, that's such a good outlook. I remember working up in Idaho. I was working for the Forest Service for a little while, and they had this really strange mix of public land and private land. They're also one of the most public states. And, but a lot of times to get to this public land where you're trying to go on the map, you have to cross through a ton of private land. They'd have all these markers marking, hey, this is my property, stay off. But after you get to a certain point, it was public land. I feel like we don't really have to deal with that as much in Nevada.
Yes, not so much at all. But even that particular situation is getting a little bit better with some recent legislation that's helping to develop maps of public lands, especially public lands that are cut off by private lands. And being a resource, it's being developed right now, so don't look for it, but it's going to help people find their way through the private lands to get to the public lands. But still, you still have to get through the private lands before you can just get out of your car and start walking. So it's a real benefit here to have so much public land.
Great. Yeah, speaking of going in the right direction, what do you think about the Desert National Wildlife Refuge? And that's, so for those that don't know, it's a piece of public land. It's one of the biggest wildlife refuges in the North American continent, I believe. And it's being slightly encroached on by the Nellis Air Force Base, where they want to expand the military property. Is that correct?
Yes, it's the largest wilderness area in the continent, in the lower 48. So some of the ones in Alaska are bigger, but Alaska's so far away, we might as well claim to have the biggest one. Yeah, so the Air Force, it's a difficult question. The Air Force is getting more and more advanced weaponry, and they need to be able to shoot from farther and farther away. And so they've decided that the best thing to do is to take over a big chunk of the National Wildlife Refuge. So they can not necessarily drop bombs on that land, at least not intentionally, but to be able to shoot their guided missiles and things starting over the wildlife refuge. The problem is if you're using experimental weapons and you shoot off a missile and it's a dud, and it's going to fall. And so if it falls on the wildlife refuge, well, maybe it's going to fall in the campground or something and kill a bunch of people. And so you can't have that. So the military has to control the land underneath them when they drop their bomb, when they shoot their missiles. And so they decided the easiest thing to do was to fly over the wildlife refuge and shoot their missiles from there. And presumably then the missiles would, go across the wildlife refuge and over into the military lands and blow up things over there. But a lot of people think that protecting the National Wildlife Refuge for wildlife and for recreation is really important. And we think it would be just as easy for them to, instead of flying over the refuge, fly in from a different direction, which they do control. So they have 3 sides they can come in from, and they want the 4th. And so right now the legislation in the Defense Authorization Act keeps the status quo, more or less keeps the status quo. So we think that's a big win. Our senators are fighting hard for it. Other representatives, Horsford is fighting hard for it. It's in his district. And so far, it looks like it's a win for the National Wildlife Refuge system. And really, Nevada has given enough. We've given away huge amounts of our state to the military. We let them drop atomic bombs on our state. Nevada has given enough. Let the military fly in from one of the other 3 directions and leave the wildlife refuge alone. And so far, we think that's a win for wildlife and wildlife refuge.
Great. Thanks a lot for giving us more details on that. That was super interesting. That also kind of brings us back a little bit to Yucca Mountain as far as giving away our natural resources and our land, right?
Yeah, Yucca Mountain's an interesting place. Everybody comes to Nevada from somewhere else. So the last time I came to work on the Yucca Mountain project. I was one of the senior ecologists studying the environment of the mountain before they put nuclear waste in it. And they never did put nuclear waste in it, but we were looking at it, what it would be like beforehand. It was a really interesting opportunity to do a lot of really good ecological research. Unfortunately, the politics got in the way of publishing most of that interesting stuff, but we got some of it out. But really, Yucca Mountain is a complicated question. It probably would deserve an entire discussion rather than a mention just today. But
sure.
Keeping things the way they are, not bringing nuclear waste to Nevada at this point, is probably a good thing.
Great.
Actually, to sort of sum up my thoughts about the whole thing, is being a scientist and looking for Yucca Mountain from a scientific perspective, I really think that there's probably no place better to store nuclear waste on American soil. And we have to do that somewhere, so there's probably no better place for it. But for my 11 years of working on the project, what scared the hell out of me was the thought that those incompetent people would be running the project. They couldn't even manage the supply cabinet. You needed a pen. You can't get one because they can't manage the supply cabinet. If they can't do that, then how the hell can I run and manage a nuclear waste facility?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there would be a better place. I'm not an expert in that field for sure. But one thing that I found unfair from a Nevadan's point of view is that all of the nuclear facilities are on the East Coast, minus one or two of them. So, I mean, they're benefiting from it, and then we get kind of the short end of the stick at the end of the day. So from a fairness point of view, I just don't see why that would be possible.
Yeah, well, so this is why it would take a whole event just to discuss this one issue. There's a lot of things. The whole issue of transportation is a big problem, which you bring up. So, if you have nuclear waste generated in New York, you got to get it to Nevada. There's a whole lot of states and cities in the way that you got to haul that stuff through. That's definitely a problem. The engineers would say that they've worked out the problems, and they probably have. But probably when you're talking about nuclear waste is not really good enough. The status quo is untenable. Something does need to be done. But that's for another issue, and hopefully the people that manage that project will be much more competent than the people who manage the Yucca Mountain project when I was on it.
Yeah, maybe I would be more convinced if I knew what was happening to the nuclear waste or how that was being stored right now. But yeah, I think we might just leave that topic and just move on, since you've hinted at that a couple times. So let's get back to the public lands. You've done a ton of services for public lands. What was your first big project, the project that originally propelled you into the conservation field?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. The first big project that propelled me into it?
Or your first most memorable project, the first most impactful for you, anything like that?
Well, I started on this stuff shortly after I turned 18, and I went to Idaho, and I worked in the woods too with the Forest Service. And I didn't really know who I was or what I was doing at the time, and I learned cutting down trees for the Forest Service that I didn't really care for that kind of work. The fighting fire was a lot of fun. There you really felt like you were doing something useful.
Were you on wildland?
Yes,
Okay.
Wildland fires. We did a lot of prescribed burning too. It's northern Idaho. There's lots of logging land up there.
What area?
Clearwater Forest.
What area were you in?
Clearwater National Forest.
Okay.
Out of Orofino, Idaho.
Okay.
You had said you worked up there too?
Yes, I was primarily in McCall area. Okay. When I was working, I did work for AmeriCorps, and I was just an intern up there last year. And I was doing recreational cleanups and stuff like that, chopping down dead trees in campgrounds and clearing recreational trails, digging irrigation on recreational trails, stuff like that. And it was Tough job. Tough job. Throw a chainsaw on your back and carry your lunch and hike for 10 miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this,
So that's really where it started. And then I realized that I wanted to do more to protect the land than to manage the timber harvesting forest. So I ended up going to the National Park Service, and I did a dozen seasons with the national parks, and did quite a lot of defending Mother Nature, defending people's silence, the right to silence in campgrounds, um, the right to drive safely on a highway in a national park. Yeah, so that's, I don't know how I would pick, the first thing that really drove me into it was really just sort of an all life's ambition to do these sorts of things, and just, one step at a time, and it just sort of grew and grew.
great. Let's move on a little bit. Can you tell us about the Mining Marker Knockdown Project and your short film that's affiliated with it, where I believe you won the Sierra Club's National Achievement Award last year? How important was that recognition for you?
Well, yeah, it's quite an honor to be recognized by the National for the efforts that one little person is putting in. I mean, not literally one little person, but it was pretty small project considering the number of people that are involved. But yeah, so mining claim markers, explain that first. If you go out on public lands and you find some gold, as a citizen, you can stake a claim, which means that you can get it somehow. But the phrase "to stake a claim" comes from the notion of literally taking a stake, driving it in the ground, and saying, "This is mine." So think of Christopher Columbus showing up on the mainland of Florida and planting his flag and declaring that all of America is his. I mean, that sort of a notion is where it comes from, staking a claim. Well, over the years, the stake that prospectors used changed. And in about 1970, they started using 4-inch diameter PVC pipes. They're about 6 feet long and 4 inches diameter. Sometimes they're 3. So you find all different things, but mostly 4-inch. And people that spend a lot of time out in mining areas are going to see these things and always sort of wonder what they are. So those are the mining claim markers. Well, after about 10 years or so, conservationists started realizing that birds and other creatures were getting trapped down in these pipes. So a bird would come along, and land on the top of the pipe and look down in and say, "Oh, there's a hole. Maybe I can make a nest down in there." And they drop down in the pipe, and then they're stuck and they can never get back out, and they die. And it took another 10 years. So about 1990, they banned the use of them on public lands. And Nevada went one step farther, gave prospectors 20 years to retrofit their claims, which was up to about 2010, and said that if you haven't retrofitted your claim by then, citizens can go out on the ground and just knock them over on the presumption that they've been abandoned. So the Mining Claim Marker Project deals with going out and finding these markers, and then organizing groups of people to come out and knock them down. It's a great way to save a lot of birds. Birds and other creatures are having a hard time in the Mojave Desert these days. The total number of birds are down by about half since I started birding as a kid, which is a pretty shocking thing. Half the birds are gone. And so, knocking down these pipes is one little way to help save the birds.
Wow. I love that so much because you get this tangible, positive result from doing something, as opposed to a lot of conservation work, which might be, let's say you're working on climate change. You might not get a super tangible result until 10 years from now or 20 years from now. But saving birds by knocking down these PVC pipes that are in the desert seems like you have these direct, immediate, tangible results of no other birds can fly in this and die. That's why I love that so much. Can you tell us a little bit about your film, your short film, Foul Claims?
Yeah. So a friend of mine, Fred, who's come out and helped knock down some of these pipes, is a filmmaker, and he decided to feature this project in one of his documentary films to spread the word and encourage other people to get out and do the same thing. So yeah, he worked on it probably for 6 months. I probably worked on it with him over about a 2-month time span, and he's produced a nice little film. It's been accepted at some film festivals, and we're really excited. Going to kind of do a soft premiere for it at the next Red Rock Audubon meeting.
Awesome. When will that be?
September 12th.
Okay, a month from today. Great. Okay. So obviously there's the immediate tangible results of knocking down the pipes that no other birds can get stuck in there, right? Is that something that keeps you going in the positive direction, or what is driving you?
Yeah, well, it certainly is. It's definitely the immediate feedback of knowing that you've done something good. So, if you think too hard about it, you can imagine that humans are going to nuke yourselves to death tomorrow. And if we did that, we would all be gone, theoretically. But those pipes are still out there on the land, and they're likely to stay standing for another 100 years, maybe longer for some of them. So it's the immediate feeling that, if we all left this earth with those pipes standing, the birds are still going to die. So if you can knock them down today, then you've done something good for all of eternity. That at least something good for the next 100 years. That you've done some good, and you occasionally find live things in it. I actually found a live bird in one time. I turned it upside down. This live bird drops out the top, and it was just sort of stunned there on the ground, and then got up and flew away. And it was such a remarkable thing. There's actually quite a long story that goes along with that. It's one of those hand of God type stories. Being a scientist, I tend not to believe in the hand of God types of things, but it was kind of an event that made me wonder about stuff like that. It's a good campfire story. We'll tell it some other time. But it was a remarkable experience, and it's not unusual to find live lizards. Lizards are cold-blooded, so they can go months and months without eating. We find lots of live beetles. It's always, it's just a dumb beetle, but it's always nice to pull them out and set them on the ground and watch them walk away.
So these dead birds, you take out the pipe and you shake it out and you count how many skulls are in there or something like that. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. The NDOW and BLM actually want the data, so we keep track of what we find in the pipes.
And these are primarily one type of bird, from what I understand?
Yeah, so it depends on where you are. In southern Nevada is primarily ash-throated flycatchers. They're a migratory bird that nests in tree cavities. So a cavity in a cottonwood tree, an old rotten out stump in a cottonwood, or Joshua trees. And it's not terribly different from one of these birds to land on the top edge of a rotten out Joshua tree and look down inside the hollow, versus landing on a pipe and looking down in and seeing a hollow. So they just drop down in, and that's it. Up in northern Nevada, they mostly catch bluebirds. So our state bird, the mountain bluebird, is the primary thing they catch up there. That's because they have bluebirds up in the north, and we have ash-throated flycatchers down here. But you catch all sorts of things. You list any little bird, and you probably found one of them in a pipe. And then snakes and chipmunks and bats, all sorts of things. Oh, and one of the other things too is, as we haven't really mentioned, is 1-inch pipes. So a little small diameter pipe. So you would say, well, we don't have to worry about those because they're too small for birds and things to get down in them. But it turns out they are massive killers for bees. And who knows why, but native bees go into these 1-inch pipes, and you can have a pipe 6 feet long packed full of dead bees. I worked in an area where I had 2-inch diameter pipes, which again are really too small for the birds to get in. And I was tipping out 5,000 dead bees from a single pipe, just over and over. And as you know, bees are having a lot of trouble these days too. So in the course of doing this, we realized that there's incentive to knock down these small diameter pipes too.
Wow. So the main solution is to, of course, knock down these pipes that are known to cause the problems. And in the future, if you're going to stake a mining claim, to use a different kind of pipe that is solid and has no holes in it that any animals can get in. Is that correct?
Yeah, the main thing that people are using these days are 2x2 wooden stakes. So yeah, you can use a 2x2 stake. You can use a 1-inch diameter solid metal bar, which I can't imagine carrying very many of those out in the woods out in the desert to stake your claim. Or you can pile up rocks, but the main thing people are using these days are the wooden posts.
Okay, great. I really appreciate you answering all my questions. That's all the questions I have for now. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to add?
Yeah, I would like to talk about public service on public lands in general. So, there's a lot of things that everybody can do while they're out hiking. And I like to phrase it as hiking with a purpose. So, most people just go out hiking and, I don't know, they hike up to the top of a mountain and they sign the name of the racer and turn around and walk back down. And, they've gotten some exercise and they saw some nice views, but they haven't really accomplished anything. But people can hike with a purpose. They can do things like pick up the trash they find. A really simple thing, is helping to fix the trails. Like, there's not very much money for the public land, so maybe with this new Land and Water Conservation Fund, we're going to have more money for more trail crews. But in the meantime, it's us people going out and hiking and using the trails. If you can just knock a couple of rocks out of the trail, it's really helpful for the next person walking along. And if you do it on your way up, then they're out of the way for you on your way back down. So just kicking rocks out of the trail. If there's a branch that's falling across the trail, just stop and toss it off to the side. Don't be rolling rocks down hillsides on people down below or anything like that. But there's a lot of little things that people can do. If you see graffiti out there, report it to the land management agencies. So a lot of things that people can do to give back to the land with very little personal effort while they're out enjoying nature.
That's one interesting that I found when I was doing the AmeriCorps Forest Service volunteer thing in Idaho was that we would go out to a trail sometimes and the first part of the trail would already be trimmed up. I mean, we're the only trail crew in the area, but apparently people would be such avid hikers and love the area so much. It would be their trail, like this is my trail. And then they would bring their own tools and cut the low hanging branches and move the huge rocks. And it was just crazy how into it some people got. And I really love that.
Yeah, well, you don't even have to get into it that hard by taking tools. Just, if there's a rock in the trail, just kick it out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing, if you're out driving on the back roads and there's a rock in the road and people are driving around it, driving in the bushes to get around the rock in the road, just stop it for a minute and roll the rock off to the side. And then people will stay on the road and not drive in the bushes to get around it. There's a lot of little tiny things that everyday people can do to help protect our public lands, your own personal service projects.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing to that as well. I thought of, a lot of people also go off-roading on places that they shouldn't. And I think that's a huge problem right now where people are getting excited. They have these ATVs, which are no longer called ATVs because they're not supposed to go on all terrain. They're now called OHVs, off-highway vehicles. So I mean, people are taking these up mountains and kind of ravaging our state's natural beauty a lot of the time. And that's kind of a shame. They're not really working on preserving. They're being a little bit selfish and destroying a lot of things that we should be able to enjoy for generations.
It is a big problem. You know, a lot of places, I spend a lot of time out in Gold Butte. And while most of the people in Gold Butte do the right thing and drive on the roads, I mean, there's every level of road out there. There's stuff that a passenger car can get down. There's roads that an ATV can barely make it down. So, you know, you can find your adventure if you want to. A lot of people just drive off. And so there's something else, you know, make a note of where it is and tell the land management agency where you saw tire tracks. And they'll get a group of people to go out and rake them out. So you know how it is. If one person sees tracks, they're going to drive out there to see where that guy went.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon you've got a little road going out to nowhere. And you got to keep up on these things. If we can keep them raked out, then people won't see it as a possible place to drive and figure out, you know, what did that guy see over there? But you know, those are the kind of things that you can do a lot on your own. But then you have to take a rake and maybe a shovel and some other things. It's a little bit harder to do. But you know, keeping track and reporting those things is really helpful for organizing groups to go out and do it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd also like to bring up your website, birdandhike.com. So this website offers all kinds of helpful nature hints, from birding to back road driving to hiking. It offers a ton of tools. How can people best use that, or what's the best use for your website?
Well, it's primarily designed for bird watchers and hikers. And so if you want to go birding around Las Vegas, it's got all the best sites listed. It's got information on how to get there, what you'll see when you're there, something about the ecology of the land while you're there. So you can, you know, it's more than just a straight guidebook. Here's where you go. It also includes, so like I say, the things you'll see, and you know, maybe some ecology, maybe some geology, things like that. The same thing for hikers. If you want to go hiking, you know, if you want to go hiking up on Mount Charleston, click on the link for Mount Charleston. It'll take you to what I think are all the best hikes up there, and give you some information. And then if I say, you know, the trail goes through a ponderosa pine forest, there'll be a link, a ponderosa pine forest, and it'll take you to something you can learn about the ponderosa pine forests, or the ponderosa pine trees, or the beetles that eat the ponderosa pine trees. There's quite a lot of that kind of information. Just a little digging around, people find all sorts of interesting tidbits.
Awesome. Well, Jim, thank you so much for being on our show. And for everyone, this is a sustainability podcast. Please, if you get a chance, to check out Nevada Conservation League Facebook page for some fun content we're putting out. Also, check out Jim's super helpful website, birdandhike.com, which is intended as a tool to help people bird and hike. And so thank you for hanging out.